And we can get into it. I hope everyone's doing all right. Welcome. My name is Sandra Miola. I'm the director of the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. A few housekeeping items before we get started. If you feel comfortable, feel free to indicate your pronouns in your Zoom name. You just have to click the three little dots in the top right corner of your photo to change the name. This call is being recorded. Feel free to insert questions in the chat box at any time. The chat box will be saved. And a friendly reminder, if you are not speaking, to please leave yourself on mute. And with that, thanks so much for joining our inaugural work plan development meetings. This is the first time we're co-creating our work plans with our members, all of you. And we are really thrilled to do so to foster inclusivity and transparency within our processes. Today's meeting outcome is to take a look at our 2021 draft federal policy work plan based on your ideas and feedback. These work plans will really help guide what our staff and our work groups will focus on in the year ahead, and also assist us with prioritizing what we need to prioritize. So your input is really critical. So again, I'm really glad you're all here, and we're really hoping to have a discussion throughout the call today. So feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to chime in. Otherwise, use the chat box at any point. You all should have received a Word document attached to an email that was sent prior to this call by Kip. This is our draft federal policy work plan that we will be working off of today. And in terms of process, because everyone loves process, we'll keep it pretty loosely formatted. We did one of these yesterday and thought it went fairly well within this format, but what we'll do is, we'll hear from the organizations that nominated these specific policy priorities, the organizations that will be leading the work on each of these policy areas. Those folks will provide a summary of the objectives and activities indicated in the draft work plan, and then we'll open it up for some dialogue. As we go through the work plan, the draft work plan, some of the questions I'd like folks to kind of keep in the back of your head as we move through are, what other activities do we want to prioritize? Are we missing anything? Do we want to collect input on the work plan from other partners, AKA who's missing from this conversation? And then finally, last but not least, certainly not least, how can we be more inclusive and equitable in these activities and delivering them throughout the course of the year? So we'll also, I can just copy paste these questions and put them in the chat box as well as you continue to noodle on some of the answers that you might have as we switch over. So Kip, if you could share your screen so everyone can take a look at the draft federal policy work plan at this point. Folks can also follow along on their own computer, but we figured it's nice and easy to do it this way. If folks need that bigger, just put it in the chat box, let us know. So our federal policy work plan, right? So our overall goal for having the coalition dive into federal policy is to ensure that those policies, spending, implementation on the federal level support a healthy, protected, resilient Delaware River watershed in the face of the threats that the watershed pertains to: climate change, of course, erosion, habitat loss, et cetera, but also making sure that we're protecting the headwaters as well, the pristine areas of those cold water fisheries that Jeff Skelding at FUDR always reminds me of. So it's kind of that balance of making sure we're protecting, but also encouraging a healthier and restored watershed as we come down in the South. So our first objective is to build a greater coalition presence on the Hill in Washington, D.C. with all of our congressional folks within the watershed, really having the coalition being seen as a diverse network with political influence. We still are a fairly young coalition. We were founded in 2012. How do we continue to build the momentum that we've had thus far and really position ourselves to be a resource for policy development when it comes to watershed health and network building? So some of these specific activities, Kip, if you could scroll down just a bit, building and maintaining strong relationships with congressional staff to increase that access. which we do on a fairly regular basis. Most notably, we have our annual Hill Week. This week this year it's a virtual Hill Week versus Hill Day, where we'll surely miss everyone in person, but where we have the opportunity to bring constituents and member organizations down to DC with us, in this case over Zoom this year, and really, advocate for our policy priorities, advocate for sufficient spending on specific watershed programs, et cetera, while also building those relationships. So another activity encompasses quite a bit, as you'll see in the bullets. Advocate for national legislation that advances the coalition's mission through activities, including, when we advocate for national legislation, that's kind of a pretty large umbrella, so that this includes, building and maintaining those strong relationships with congressional staff. But it also includes some of our communication resource building, like developing member organization sign-on letters, which we do throughout the year on various pieces of legislation. It can include, social media toolkits, with which Rita on our staff does a great job in formulating, op-eds, and so on. And this can also include softer activities, such as urging members of Congress to sign on a particular piece of legislation as a co-sponsor. So these, the list below that you'll see, these couple bullet points here, these are what we've kind of nailed on for 2021 as some pieces of legislation that we'll really want to push for in the year ahead to support. Some of which the coalition isn't a particular lead on, but we're either a supportive role or a lead role, which I'll indicate as we kind of run through this list. And first, I know Sean Jackson is on the call, who can speak a little bit about the first bullet in having the coalition really advocate for future water infrastructure investment, particularly, in a time of COVID. We really need that water infrastructure prime and poised to be, effective and sustainable for communities, particularly disadvantaged communities. So Sean, I'll invite you to take yourself off mute and just say a couple words about this particular activity, and American Rivers is leading on this particular bullet for the coalition. So Sean, I'll hand it over.
Yeah, sure. So long and short of it, very quick rundown is no news to anybody. The water infrastructure across the whole nation is pretty poorly rated from a year-to-year basis. I think this last year we had maybe a D- in this region. But part of the opportunity that we see in the upcoming year from American Rivers is that the new administration has seemed fairly reasonable about wanting to work on this issue. Part of that, well, let me back up a little for a second. Typically, we've paid for water infrastructure through two ways federally, through the Clean Water SRF, the State Revolving Fund, and the Drinking Water SRF. These low interest loans really help the local community. People get projects on the ground and paid for, and it has seen some quite a bit of success. This is how the federal government typically manages water infrastructure. Over the last year, through the COVID relief stimulus, various talks, the Dems in the House have been pretty bullish on getting a lot more funding to the SRF program, specifically through emergency funding. We see with the new majority head of the Democrats and the new administration that we can run with those numbers that they proposed last year and really try and get a lot more funding done through local regional levels. And then part of that, there's quite a lot of research going on to show that in the same way that we advocate for green infrastructure as part of a specific dedicated amount of the SRFs that are given, we think, and a few other organizations that work on SRFs every year, think that the best way to maybe move forward is to have some of the areas that are most affected by poor water infrastructure, the environment, communities that are worst hit by it also have some dedicated funding spent to them. So to make sure that some of this money every time is made sure that it goes into the neighborhoods that need it the most, as opposed to how it's done now, which mostly goes to a lot of management plants and things like that. I think that's probably the 1 or 2 minutes that you wanted. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions or thoughts on what Sean spoke about water infrastructure from folks? Any clarifications that we can provide? All right. So moving on, Environmental Justice for All Act. This is another one that the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, in partnership with our sister coalition down in the Chesapeake Bay, which is the Choose Clean Water Coalition, has been fairly active in really pushing for co-sponsors. The Environmental Justice for All Act is a very progressive, strong EJ bill. In so far, Senate sponsors in the watershed only include Senator Booker. On the House, it's Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman and Representatives Evans, Cartwright in Pennsylvania, and in Delaware, of course, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. So I think for sure in the year ahead, we'll definitely make a strong push, particularly during our Hill Week in March, to get more co-sponsors on that piece of legislation. But we're really, in a supportive role on that, really letting environmental justice lead groups lead on this particular bill. So pretty excited about that. The next one is the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. I also should mention the bill numbers that are indicated. These are from the 116th Congress, not the incoming Congress. So just note that we expect these bills to be reintroduced, but no new bill numbers just yet. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, again, is a wide sweeping attack on single-use plastics, a really strong bill, excellent bill that would ban certain single-use products such as single-use cutlery, would also require a national bottle deposit program throughout the country, and also requires some manufacturer consumer responsibility for disposal. So, really encouraging that circular economy approach. Same thing here, encouraging co-sponsors from our Delaware River Watershed delegation. The lead organization here, as I understand it, is really the Surfrider Foundation. We are, a supporting coalition, helping to push this forward as it relates to our priority, our coalition priority of really amplifying efforts to reduce single-use plastics from entering the watershed, which, if this was passed and if it does move through and ultimately passes, this would absolutely benefit, the country and the watershed, of course. And finally, the last bullet, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, or Rawa. New Jersey Audubon has been a lead within the coalition for this bill, and I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague Drew Tompkins from New Jersey Audubon to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, wonderful colleague Sandra. So yeah, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, I think many of you have heard me talk about this before, but just again, as a general overview, the 30,000 foot purpose of Recovering America's Wildlife Act is to prevent species from reaching listed status. So before they're listed as threatened or endangered, we want to be building up habitat. So when we see there's multiple different levels of species of concern, et cetera, both at the state and federal level, and we can see where species are. And once we see them starting to decline, we want to, at that point, start revitalizing their habitats so that they can begin to thrive again and not reach T&E status. Because once you reach that threatened and endangered T&E status, there's a whole host of additional regulations and other issues that come along with it. It becomes very expensive. Both the entire process of listing is extremely expensive because of review process for the federal government and for petitioners, et cetera. But also once a species is listed, it's very expensive and very difficult for states to build around them, do infrastructure, all these different things can be hampered. So the idea of this bill is to prevent that from happening while also, of course, creating a robust environment for wildlife, which at the same time, if you're restoring habitat, creating healthy ecosystems, that's of course protecting water quality as well. As we all know that all of this is interconnected, which is why it makes a lot of sense for the coalition to be behind it. As you can see from the document, only the House side has been introduced up to this point. There's been lots of discussion in the Senate about it being introduced, and now that we are going to have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president, we are really excited that there's potential to move this along. Maybe not in the exact same form as it was last year. There's been amendments all the way along, and so I don't want to really dig into too many of the specifics, such as how funding is allocated. It is a little more, as of now, beneficial for our region than LWCF, for instance, or state wildlife grants. There's more money that would come to us because there's a higher percentage of population that's taken into account. But all of these things could change, and we'll be advocating for it and see kind of where the also national partners, NWF is a big sponsor and leader of this bill as well. So excited to move forward on this and think there's a really good opportunity over the next year to 2 years with this Congress to make some really big movement on a bill that has a lot of also bipartisan and moderate support, which of course will still be necessary to move things through the Senate as long as it's not through budget reconciliation. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions on it as well. And I think that's way over my 2 minutes, a little long-winded. Sorry.
No, you're good, Drew. Stacy from DRBC asked that, I tried to indicate the list of congressional members within the watershed that didn't sign on as a co-sponsor yet. I mean, this Rawa is incredibly bipartisan, but any thoughts on that, or any ideas or strategies that we can put into place to encourage the folks that haven't signed on to sign on?
Yeah, so one, I think seeing this, whatever the bill, whatever form the bill takes, and if there's any amendments in the next Congress will matter. There's been some concern. This is a huge program. We're talking billions of dollars each year, and not a real solid way to pay for it. It was in the original versions, it was tied to oil and gas revenue, but is similar to LWCF. But that was taken out in the most recent version. So so some of the pay-go measures and those kind of things might have come up. This also wasn't, without a Senate companion, it wasn't, I think, top priority when we were also advocating for things like LWCF, which we were successful on. So I think now that we have this, more people will get on board with it as we move forward. So yeah, like you said, there's a pretty wide variety from pretty liberal people like Norcross, maybe you would say Cheryl or Kim, to straight moderates like Gottheimer, and then some Republicans on there as well. So, but I think if you looked at the co-sponsor list, all of those political persuasions are represented across the country. So I think that we would be able to get them on. Just think it's timing and prioritization is probably why some of these people weren't on previously.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Drew. Folks have any questions or other further ideas to amplify these priorities in the year ahead? I'm referring back to that list of questions that I put in the chat and said earlier, who's missing, who should we show this work plan to? How do we make sure that we're taking diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice into account within these activities? Other ideas folks have, et cetera. Feel free to take yourself off mute if you want to jump on in. All right, well, hearing none, we can always circle back or, put any thoughts in the chat as you see fit. But so moving on to objective 2, ensuring the successful and equitable allocation of land and water conservation dollars within the Delaware River watershed. The lead coalition member organization for this particular objective is the Appalachian Mountain Club, and we have Mark Sarkatansky and Kimberly Witt on the line. I think I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly to say a few words about LWCF. So Kimberly, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Again, Kimberly Witt, Mid-Atlantic Policy Manager with Appalachian Mountain Club, and myself and many of my colleagues, as well as many of the organizations and representatives here on this call, have worked on the Land and Water Conservation Fund for some time. So we're coming off of some celebrations with the final securing of full permanent funding for LWCF through the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act. And we haven't wasted any time shifting from that, after that celebration to our next goal, which is ensuring the successful and equitable allocation of the funds. So now we're kind of looking towards the program implementation because the permanent reauthorization and the full funding asks at the level of $900 million have been realized. But before, I guess it would be before the winter break, we did see some kind of, what do I want to call it, like a pushback from the administration or a risk to the equitable allocation of funds that came in the form of a secretarial order out of the Department of Interior that would have placed some unnecessary restrictions on how those project funds are spent. Fortunately, there was a course correct through the compilation of the project lists and the FY21 appropriation process by Congress. So these are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at. That secretarial order is something that's going to be an ask of the new administration to overturn as soon as they come in. And hopefully we're poised to do that. The coalition has been an excellent partner, and all of your organizations have been really excellent in helping to highlight the success of the Land and Water Conservation Fund and on social media, as well as doing project closings and to come together as partners to celebrate those sites and show what these projects really mean on the ground in the Delaware River watershed. So you can see on the slide that we have some of the strategies here listed, and these largely pull over from what we have been doing in the other campaigns. And now we can, move forward with similar strategies toward the goal of equitable and successful allocation. I know there are a lot of organizations on the call that work on this, so I'm going to open it up and feel free to chime in with any suggestions, clarifications, etc.
Hey folks, this is Taiki from National Audubon Society. I learned about LWCF this year, and I was happy to advocate for it and see it get passed. Seeing that it does get royalties from drilling, and ultimately drilling is a thing we should stop doing. At what point do we realize the funding mechanism for this is problematic? And then how would we, come to terms with addressing that? Because I would imagine that it would only take a matter of time before, a member of Congress, comes to and says, as good as LWCF is, we can't have this be the funding mechanism. And then, that puts things into quite a kerfuffle. Could you take note of the use of the word kerfuffle? I think that might.
It was a good one. Way to get it in there, Taiki.
Thank you.
And this is a good question and a topic that has been rolled around within the Land and Water Conservation Fund Coalition and comes up, this had started as an offset program for the activities that are going on that do have an impact on the environment. So, taking the tax from that and kind of offsetting it through this program. But there has been talk about a changing of the funding mechanism. How soon that is going to occur, I cannot say that with any kind of certainty, but it is a topic that is on the minds of the coalition. And I think also the members of Congress who support the Land and Water Conservation Fund to think about that funding mechanism moving forward. So I don't have any more specifics besides that, unless anybody else on the call does.
Yeah, not more specifics for me, but just to reinforce what you were saying there, I think it's really important that this money's coming in no matter what to the federal government from oil. As much as we would love to not see any offshore drilling or any, natural gas, et cetera, as of now, this money is still coming in, and using it to protect the environment is, I think, a good use of that money. And if we weren't using it for this, it would just go probably to the general fund or to some other program that isn't as beneficial or in our, something we're advocating for. So I think it's a good rationale for using this money. But yes, long term, and, are we talking 10, 15, 20 years down the line? It's probably kind of that long term is where we're looking. We'll need a new funding source. Hopefully, ideally, we'll be mostly off of fossil fuels at that point, in 20 years. But for now, I think it's important that we, have it in there, and that money from what is a real negative is going towards a positive in some sort of offset manner.
This is Jacqueline. Can you hear me from Pinelands Preservation Alliance?
Yes.
I just want to add maybe a question to that too, based upon what Drew said. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's more along the lines of, these sources of fossil fuel with the offshore oil are kind of grandfathered in. So obviously, once they reach their capacity and just can't find any more, but that probably, does anybody know how long that is? I am thinking, for some of these places, 15, 20 years, but, as long as they're in place and grandfathered in, as long as we don't get any new sources, definitely keeping, LWCF tied to that up until, we get to that point is definitely a good idea. So I was just curious if anybody knew how long that might be.
So at this point, Jacqueline, I don't think there is any, expectation of decoupling the program from this particular funding source. Are you asking whether there is any kind of timeline for changing over to a new funding source, or actually how long it would be until we run out of the products of the drilling?
That's correct, the products. So
That
even
I
if they
cannot
go
to. I don't know that, that's a little bit more of a scientific question, and I haven't seen any research. Maybe somebody on the call has.
I don't have an answer to that question, but I would like to add that if you want to discourage a consumptive use, you want to make the tax higher, not eliminate the tax on the consumptive use. So right now, LWCF has always been a program tied to the offshore drilling. And those are, tied into leases, 5, 10, 20-year leases. So that's not going to go away anywhere in a short period of time. And we're probably, talking about the elimination of oil drilling, you're probably talking in terms of century or more.
Good point. I agree. Yeah, increasing the tax, absolutely.
Thank you all for those. Oh, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, so this is Alan Hunt from Musconetcong Watershed Association. Kimberly, I wanted to ask a question here. In the past, I recall sometimes a scramble getting towards Hill Day, trying to figure out how much money from LWCF went out on the ground via the Federal Highlands Act in New Jersey. And I know in the past, that's sometimes been difficult, and we haven't had photos of some of those projects that have been used. I know in the Musconetcong, we've used LWCF money at least 2 sites. There's signs up at 2 sites. And I don't necessarily know what's current about that. how can we better integrate some of the advocacy of the on the ground uses of those funds in our outreach, both in like a sense of like how do we get the table, photos, site visits, especially when it's going through this intermediary method of LWCF to Highlands Act funding, then it goes to like Green Acre, DEP, then Green Acres, then like the Highlands Council, and then the project.
Alan, I think that's a really good point. And it can be a challenge, especially when the different states, allocate that money, and then the Highlands or whatever it is, Forest Legacy is a program of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So you bring up a really good point there. And I think that is a role that we have to play on a coalition basis, in terms of education and just making sure that the state agencies know, that we're interested in talking about these on the ground projects, as well as, the watershed organizations, or I'm thinking about some of my work in the Pennsylvania Highlands and thinking about land trusts. So, part of that is just to keep talking about how important this is, how important the advocacy is, and try to collect those project examples and photos, really give the organizations involved the opportunity to shine and celebrate. Because I think connecting the dots between, a line item on a budget sheet and the on the ground projects for our members of Congress is really important. And it will help the organizations feel connected to, that they can connect their work to those funding sources as well. So it kind of goes both ways. Did that help at all?
I think in general, we're saying the same thing there. I think I'm asking more of an implementation question, like how do we do that? So like we're the Watershed group on the ground. I could literally go down the road and grab a photo of the LWCF sign at a wildlife management area. Do I know how much money was used from LWCF for purchasing that site? I have no clue. Like, and I don't have the relationships to trace that all the way back to how the money came into DEP. And I'm not sure DEP is particularly transparent around all this either. So I can help you out in this very limited way. I can help out the coalition in this very limited way. But like, I couldn't give you any specifics aside from I've got a sign, I've got a site, and I've got people enjoying it. I can't connect the dots. So
Sure.
how do we do that better to tell the story, saying your federal funding that you're directing Congress is resulting in this specific thing on the ground?
Well, let me say, as the person who managed the Land and Water Conservation Fund program at Green Acres for over 20 years to try to break out the funding. You have the Highlands set aside, and then there's this state apportionment that the state gets that's primarily used for state land acquisition project for additions to wildlife management areas, state parks, state forests. We've done a lot of local projects with land and water money in the past, but we're mostly, when I was there, we were focusing on state land projects. And I really think it's as simple as reaching out to Green Acres and saying, hey, listen, let's talk about different types of projects that you may be working on in the watershed with land and water, because I did several projects in the watershed when over that time span, and it's all public information. So there's running tallies of where the land and water conservation. I mean the National Park Service site, the Land and Water program, they have lists by states and counties where projects are and how much money and when they were acquired and so on. So I think it's a matter of reaching out to the woman who took over the program for me at Green Acres, Courtney Wald Wickup. Some of you may know her. I would just send her an email and say, let's talk, and because the promotion of the program is always a benefit to the state, and also it's a benefit to the Park Service, because they're always looking to promote the land and water program. So that's how I would approach it, and see what's on tap as far as some projects, or recommending some projects for land and water funding. There's a whole process that the different state agencies, land managing agencies go through to review offers and projects and so forth. So, but if I was there, I'd love to talk to you guys. But I don't know if you have any questions about that or whatever, but.
And I know there's some old lists anyway, online. Alan, I can send you one link, but I'm not sure when that Muskie project was finished. Do you know, or when the money was spent?
I think, Amy, some of that was I think some was in the 90s, but I'm saying, like, in the past, like, we've had a spreadsheet, and then we've had to scramble before Hill Week to try and get all the dots connected, get photos, get stories about the sites. And I'm just saying, like, how can we do better at that to achieve this goal here? How do we connect those dots? And
There's a project, photos and starting now before Hill Week. Yeah. And there are some lists we could start looking at. Yeah, that's an interesting project. We occasionally have interns at NJCF. That would be a great project. And I don't know, Kimberly, if you guys, I know you put together state by state acquisitions, fact sheets, that sort of thing. So, and Caleb might have something coming out this year. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a really good idea for a project before Hill Week, right?
Yes, Amy, you're correct. For Highlands specifically, the Mid-Atlantic Conservation Office here for AMC puts together fact sheets. So when I keep those as up to date as possible. I have to admit I'm probably a little bit better at that in Pennsylvania, because I don't have as many feelers in New Jersey. So I would, rely on some of the partners over there to let me know if there are new projects and things that are happening. But in Pennsylvania, especially, and I, talk with the partners in New York and Connecticut as well. I follow DCNR's C2P2 press releases every year, and that's how the Land and Water Conservation Fund and in some of the Highlands money is announced. And so just trying to stay in touch with the state agencies, as well as the land trusts. And then for Pennsylvania Highlands, we will go ahead and share those press releases from the land trust organizations. So that are using the Highlands funds. And that's how we try to keep tabs of the projects and how much money is going out the door.
That's great. Thanks, Kimberly.
Hi, Sandra. This is Martha Narvaez proxy speaking. Jerry. Martha's been on the calls, but she's on the sideline, so I'm participating. Happy to be here. In the Biden school, recognition that we're going to have a whole new government in less than 6 days. Won't be business as it has been. And so there's an opportunity to really do some big things. With regard to Land and Water Conservation Fund, just looking through the State of the Basin, State of the Estuary report, about 2,000 square miles of federal, state, and local land are protected in the basin. Most of that is state, about 2/3, and the other third is federal and local nonprofit. And I've been reading about the 30 for 30 program. that I think the Biden administration is going to roll out. Collins talked about it a lot. The goal is to preserve 30% of the watershed as open space. So maybe a good point to make would be we're at 15% now. In order to get to 30, we need more land and water conservation fund. So in other words, there's data there to make the case. And the other observation is the 900 million is a great win, obviously. And Colin's written about that as well. Rare example of bipartisan movement in the Congress over the last 4 years, because both sides agree that open space is necessary. Hunters and fishermen, for instance, regards to the party. But that's only $3 per capita in the United States. And maybe there's an opportunity at the right time to say, why not double it? It's just about $1 billion. And we're hearing big numbers coming out of DC right now with the stimulus bill. We're talking $2 trillion. And so maybe there's an opportunity at the right time to increase it. It's going to be a whole new ballgame.
Gerald, I think there's.
I don't know how far the coalition wants to go out on this type of thing, but you know better than I about what the the intricacies are. But I'm hearing a lot of seminars here in the Biden school about big things happening in the area of climate change and the environment. Big and bold things, historic.
Thanks, Gerald. And I think your points about showing that the Land and Water Conservation Fund is an important program to achieve the 30 by 30 initiative to conserve 30% of the land and water by 2030 is an important one.
Mm-hmm. It's a great goal.
Especially because it's been a part of President-elect Biden's platform all along.
Mm-hmm. Especially in a pandemic where the value of open space has never been more valuable. Thanks.
So glad to have all of these thoughts. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions on moving forward the agenda on Land and Water Conservation Fund? Okay, hearing none. Sandra, should I just transition to the next one?
Yes, go for it. Thank you, Kimberly.
Okay, great. So I'm also going to introduce the topic of full fair share funding for the Delaware River Basin Commission. Again, many of the organizations on this call have expertise and have been working alongside the coalition to advocate for this. Because the federal government has historically shirked its funding for the Delaware River Basin Commission. So we're advocating for the amount of $715,000, and the conversations are kind of ongoing regarding how we can make this happen. Is there anybody who wants to add something to that? I know some of the other work in terms of funding, the funding contributions from the states would most likely be carried out in the state groups. So I'll open it up. Beth, I think I see you come off mute there.
Yeah, hi Kim. Hey Sandra, thanks for putting these meetings together. I know that I mentioned this on the call yesterday with relation to restoration funding, but it really is, front and center in this objective here. So just two items that I want to just quickly outline. For those that don't know me, I'm Beth Brown. I'm with Audubon, working on the Delaware River Watershed program, but I also work closely with colleagues on this call, Tyke James and Caitlin Wall out of our DC office. And so we've got plans to launch a federal legislative caucus that would really boost the urgency of DRBC and the funding situation. And we really think that this is, we've got a really positive outlook as we go into the new year. And as Jerry said, a new administration, whole new ball game at the federal level for the benefit of the watershed. And so, this caucus really is going to provide an essential link. It really also touches on objective 1 in this plan, right, where it's that day-to-day interaction and really building up that presence on Capitol Hill and continuing to develop champions. Although it's really focused on the DRBC, it's also highlighting and supporting the DRBRP in particular as sort of two halves of a wholly functioning future-ready watershed. But there's enough space in that other issues and hot topics we envision, being the topic of policy briefings or breakfasts or what have you, whether they're virtual or in person, depending on how things go in the next several months. But I just wanted to mention that's a plan that we have that I think really fits nicely with this work and this goal. We've already done some outreach and we're expecting to begin working on it in earnest in the coming months. And then the second thing related to this that we worked on in partnership with DRBC and a couple others in the last Congress, where we got Houlihan and Fitzpatrick, engaged in shifting the funding mechanism for DRBC's federal funding from the Army Corps to EPA as groundwork to really restart that federal appropriation. And while we were hopeful that would get wrapped into WRDA, unfortunately that didn't happen, but we're really looking ahead to this session to get that reintroduced and ultimately passed. So although we're working as part of the work group, I just wanted to highlight those two specific threads. Happy if anyone has questions to flag me down here or after the call, what have you.
I can just build on what Beth said, and I'd like to thank Beth and Tyke and Caitlin for guiding us through the work that we did last session. And we made it pretty far. We made it close to the finish line. We just didn't get across it. So one of the things that we've sort of come upon is the source of the funding being from the Army Corps, because we're not a project at DRBC and we're not a program at DRBC. We don't seem to fit neatly into their budget process. So that has become an obstacle for us. And we're trying to see, if what we could do to fit in their budget, but also we were approached on the Senate side about shifting our funding source to EPA. And so we, went down the path with that to get us into WRDA and so forth. So what would happen is when we would ask, for the appropriation, if we aren't already in the Corps' budget and we're not in the administration's budget, then it would be considered an earmark. And if you look at the timing of when we haven't been funded in about over 20 years, but in 2009, I want to say, Senator Lautenberg put forth an earmark, and that's when we got funding. And then shortly after that, there was a rule banning earmarks. So we weren't going to get the funding through the Corps that way. So I think that was sort of a very expensive but good Band-Aid that was put on our funding problem back in 2009. So we're trying to figure out, we kind of have to figure out a way to fix the root problem from our funding source before we move, or as we move ahead. So that would be possibly through the administration and or a shift in our source. And Beth, Tyke, and Caitlin have been incredibly helpful in this, as I mentioned, and we're tackling this, like I said, possibly through the administration, through Congress, and if anything changes with earmarks, everything's going to be considered.
Could I add, I think that's a perfect segue. I think you're on the right track, but not go to EPA. I think that DRBC, the representative, should be the Department of Interior. They administer lands and waters along the river, plus the Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for much of the species. And it wouldn't, I don't think, be as difficult to fit it into the budget process at Department of Interior that used to be the representative at one time.
Correct. We used to be under Interior, and we questioned that. We were approached by Senate EPW, and it was sort of put to us like this. Well, if you don't want to go to EPA, we can leave you where you're at, and you can keep banging your head against the wall, not getting funding. So we're open to exploring other agencies. That's just, what was presented to us.
Well, that's understandable. Something is better than nothing, but an agency that actually administers lands for the United States and waters in the area seems like the appropriate one too. And also it's a resource protection and consumption agency as opposed to Army. No offense to the Army, no offense to EPA, but this just isn't what they do.
Understood.
Carol, I saw you take yourself off mute. You want to jump in here?
I would like nothing better than to see DRBC fully funded, believe me. I was just wondering about the EPA choice. I actually was talking to somebody at Region 3 about a totally different topic. And she said, you know where this comes from? Why it's switching to EPA? I mean, we're not very happy about it. And so I don't know if there needs to be some more discussion with the regional offices 2 and 3 to make sure they're on board and they don't put up roadblocks about it. I also, I was wondering why you had to go back through WRDA, because when it was switched over to the Corps, as you know, it was just an add-on to a unrelated act, the Bosnia Emergency Act. So could it be a tack on to something else and not necessarily be a WRDA change? Because WRDA is mainly Corps of Engineers, not all the agencies.
Right. So the jurisdictions in the House and Senate over WRDA are different. So actually, it was the Senate, like I said, Senate EPW that proposed this amendment to move us. They directed the show and put us in EPA. And that would be an amendment to WRDA. That's the path that they saw, and they were sort of holding all the cards. When we got over to the House, they said that their Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which we kind of knew going into this, did not have jurisdiction. This did not fall under that jurisdiction because it does bring in EPA, but because WRDA and Army Corps were sort of the vehicle, we were stuck there. And during the hearing, Chairman DeFazio said he sees the problem and wants to come up with a solution, as an amendment was offered that ended up getting dropped because it was out of jurisdiction. So we have those two things to contend with how the Senate jurisdiction is, how the House jurisdiction is, which is ultimately why Houlihan and Fitzpatrick sponsored a standalone bill. And it was really never the idea that the standalone bill was going to have a companion in the Senate. It was just a vehicle to help build support over on the House side to get the amendment into conference. And also Houlihan and Fitzpatrick did send a letter over to leadership saying that that was their wish, that get considered in conference. So yeah, although we would like it to possibly be tacked onto something else and we communicate our messages, we're not always driving that. And we have to take our cues from, some of the committee or the members that are trying to assist us in remedying this problem.
Yeah, I wonder if there isn't an opening with Department of Interior because of the connection with the River Master and his role, such a strong role in the Delaware, whether there's, maybe you can take two forks at once and see which one works out.
Yeah, we're definitely going for the spaghetti approach, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. So every avenue will be explored.
I think that's right. And thanks for your feedback and comments, Carol. I think there were some discussions, at least with Region 2 of EPA, just to sort of touch on your other question. But if you have, knowledge about particular people that are interested in hearing more about it, I'd be happy to connect up with you offline.
Sure.
Super, thanks.
Hi, this is Jerry. Again, since the Water Resources Center is we receive a federal appropriation through the Water Resources Research Act of 1984, which is in the Interior, and our appropriation is tucked in the USGS. And it works pretty well. It went from 6 million up to it's now at 11 million. And what I saw just last year, of all years, part of that there was tucked in for specific work on the Upper Mississippi Basin. So there is a precedent to tuck legislation in. Now, so in Delaware, since our senior senator in Delaware is going to be chairman of EPW, and Tom Carper comes to my office every year, that might be a good reason to have EPA, because EPW oversees EPA. There might be an overlap though with the National Estuary Program, which is supported through EPA, so that might be at a downside. But I do agree the Secretary in the Interior Department might be a way to go, based on what I'm seeing here in Delaware. The other aspect of it would be, I kidded around with Steve, I think at a retirement dinner maybe about a year ago, that why not just tuck it into the DRBCA as an itemized appropriation. That's done throughout the United States. Whatever the number is now, I think it's 10 million now, Sandra. Why not tuck the additional 3/4 or maybe $1 million into that? That's done all the time.
That's great, Jerry. Thanks for that.
This is Peter Marks. I'm sorry, I just got called away. We're still on the discussion about the River Basin Commission.
Yeah, Peter, hop on in, please.
Point out from those of us on the Hill who are working to get funding for DBRCA, combining anything else under that is going to take away from that, whatever it is. Generally, those things in the end are not additive, they're subtracted. The one who gets it is in good shape, but the one who it's gotten from is not. Again, no 100% certainty, but that's often how it goes.
That might have been last year, Peter. What I'm seeing in the Interior Department with the Water Resources Research Act, there's an add, the opportunity to add. So what I'm seeing in our appropriation, it's going from, it went from 6 to 10 last year, and now we're talking about 15. And the new Interior Department is open to that, looking at larger numbers now. And they're very small numbers in comparison with the entire federal budget is. So I don't know. The rules are going to change in 6 days.
There's, just so folks know, the discretionary funding on the Hill, money's not coming down from heaven. It's still going to be really tight, which is the non-defense and non-emergency funding that goes through the appropriations process. It's going to be a reality we're going to face. There's not going to be a whole new world. Although there are going to be opportunities through infrastructure bills, maybe a climate emergency bill, a COVID relief bill, but the regular non-discretion or the regular discretionary domestic funding, it's not going up much. That's the word we're getting.
So Peter, clearly you're right that there's only one pie. So if you add on here, you take away there. But I think one of the things we will see clearly, at least with the Democrats owning everything at the moment, is an infrastructure bill. And is there some way that we can fit into an infrastructure bill that'll allow us to provide additional monies to DRBC and, you know, to the other elements of this watershed?
That actually could go. It's all the way you pitch it. The infrastructure bill is going to be a free for all. So yeah, it's actually a good point. Start thinking about how that can be pitched as adding to infrastructure. And if there's also, they're talking about a big climate bill as well. There could be a connection there.
Right. So you'll figure all that out for us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But 3 o'clock, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just echo what Peter said, I would be really hesitant to touch the DRBCA or DRBRP, given the newness of the program still, and the potential effects it would have on that Keystone program for the coalition. However, I do really like the idea of fitting DRBC somewhere in an infrastructure package down the road, if EPA is no longer a viable option. But given that the Chesapeake program and some other river basin commissions are funded within EPA's budget, I think exploring that further makes a lot of sense, given that there are a couple, 1 foot in there already. So that's just my 2 cents.
If I could just add one more thing, is that the climate bills would be a great place as well. And, at least from my experience, which is a little bit old now, they love it when they can count something twice. They can count the same piece of money twice, because it's climate change and it's infrastructure and it's Delaware River Basin. That would be 3 times, but that really provides incentive when they're working on the appropriations. And I'll shut up.
I think these are all great pieces of feedback and brainstorming. So yeah, we'll definitely, no stone unturned, check all the couch cushions kind of thing. So I do think, I don't know if Stacy highlighted this before, but one of the issues is really, because it's actually a not significant chunk of funding, it's almost easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle. And so, I think just kind of doing that baseline education and outreach, with the caucus is going to really provide that solid foundation to then, highlight how transformative that appropriation will be. So I really appreciate the feedback and happy to have additional conversations offline.
Hi, Grant from NWF. So I kind of, I'm happy to have the coalition staff keep exploring what the right path for the DRBC funding is. Obviously, this has been, a core ask for the coalition since our inception. Yet we've not gotten traction. So I'm glad to see a different approach kind of coming in. I am a bit concerned about creating a caucus just to work on the DRBC specifically, rather than a watershed caucus. And I'm kind of curious why it has such a narrow focus if we're going to go in and reconstitute that Delaware Basin Task Force, or whatever they might call themselves.
Yeah, so it's not exclusive to the DRBC, but I think that's really the driving, it's the driving conversation opener. And then, as I had said, really talking about like, what are the foundational programs and issues that create like a fully functioning, fully funded watershed. So it's not that narrow in the sense of, over the life of the caucus, you're staffing and programming a variety of topics that I think actually have a great opportunity to bring partners and showcase, on the ground work. But I do think that this, as you mentioned, this is a topic that, is so critical moving forward. hasn't necessarily had the oxygen of the nonprofit community, of the, you know, sort of the unified front, that I do think that it requires a little extra sort of catch up, maybe I would suggest, to start building the
funding for the DRBC hasn't had the oxygen? Because I challenge that. I think that's patently incorrect.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Okay. So, but I think that that's, you know, given where we are in the status, I just, you know, I think it is right for this approach.
I'll just say from my perspective and what I like to see the coalition working on is, you know, I'd love for the coalition to support your effort. I do have concerns about it being described as a caucus for the DRBC. So that being the first subject area that it pushes on makes complete sense. You know, it's the one thing one of the many things, I guess, that we've not gotten traction on the Hill for support. We continually get pushback from members on funding the DRBC, not in any kind of like, we're not going to do that, but because they're not willing to be champions for it, which I can understand in some, you know, political calculations, but it's something we keep pushing on. So if this can help to unlock it, I definitely want the coalition to be able to support, you know, a member in driving that forward. But I also don't want to, I've heard the narrative before that we haven't been supportive of the DRBC as a community. And I'm floored by that, because every time we go down to Washington, we're making the same asks.
If I can just jump in here, I think what I heard Beth say, it's not that this community hasn't been supportive of funding the DRBC, it's the federal legislators and some of the state legislators haven't been supportive of funding DRBC. And back to the idea of a caucus, we did team up with SRBC and the Potomac and had several meetings down in DC, because we thought if we joined forces, because we are in one of the pieces of legislation referred to as the Mid-Atlantic River Basin commissions, that if we sort of became looked at as the Mid-Atlantic River Basin commissions, it gave us a little bit more muscle. So instead of the, you know, 20 congressional districts that might be within the DRB, we're up to 46 congressional districts among the 3 river basin commissions. So we thought that would help us. And I think in a lot of cases it did, because we balance each other out, and we all have a slightly different scope and different mission. And I think it helped balance us out and put us in favor with some of the legislators who might oppose one of us for one reason or another. So we kind of tried the idea of a caucus, and then in the end, for the 3 of us to try to work and get our members to form a caucus, at the same time, traction for moving us from the core to EPA took hold, and we needed to put our energy into that and sort of put the idea of a Mid-Atlantic River Basin caucus sort of on the back burner for now. But, you know, we're happy to have Audubon leading the charge for a DRBC or caucus, Delaware River Basin caucus.
Stacy, this is Peter Marks. You and I had talked about that a couple of months ago. Yeah, and the last I knew, you were pursuing the 3 River Basin Commission caucus. So that is now no longer the case. It's just the Delaware River Basin caucus.
Well, the 3 River Basin commissions are kind of that's on hold for now. We really are figuring out what our plan is and our strategy for the new administration. I mean, learning, you know, that the Senate had shifted majority last week was a shift in, you know, how we want to go ahead and advocate. So that's where that is. It's just there.
And also, so effectively, just the basic question is, you're trying to create a congressional caucus that is effectively has one priority, and that's to get funding for the Delaware River Basin Commission, right?
Well, the Mid-Atlantic would have had the 3 river basin commissions, and we found that there's a real need for education as well. And one of the things, of course, is getting confused. A lot of the legislators are confused over the act or over the restoration program. So we'll go into a legislator's office and they're like, oh yeah, I signed on to the letter and you're getting your $10 million. And we're like, no, that's not us. So we thought if it would help with our identity issue, going Mid-Atlantic versus just another Delaware River Basin, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, with that, so that's was one of the other reasons. So it was education and the funding. And some of the legislators that we spoke to were happy that it was very narrow and targeted and had a specific mission.
But effectively, the answer is your one goal is to get funding for the Delaware River Basin.
Ultimately, well, if we go Mid-Atlantic, it's for all 3.
But have you guys made the decision yet?
I think Stacy's sort of making the point, and this is, you know, what I think is driving some of the consideration here is that it's impossible to stay, you know, it's kind of impossible to stay that narrow, right? When you have the conversation, and inevitably, because it is such a complex watershed and there's so many different, you know, programs and partnerships, it's a real opportunity to differentiate and to help educate about the distinct and important role that each of these major programs plays. But it is definitely coming in initially with the DRBC education and funding, priority.
And Beth, when you say that what these organizations, the roles of these organizations, the organizations are the 3 commissions, correct? Not the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, or the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program, or am I incorrect?
So actually, it's the latter. It's the interconnectedness, right? Like Stacy was saying, people are telling her she got her $10 million, right? Like we want to be able to put that question to bed, right? And so that we have a delegation, you know, for sure in the Delaware River Basin that understands, you know, to the member that there is the DRBC as well as the DRBRP and the distinct and important role that both of them play. And if we can have, you know, a rising tide lift all boats with the Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commissions, I think that's a win as well.
Let me pose a.
Does that help for you?
Let me be devil's advocate and just be very direct. Let's say you guys all go into meeting of the chairs of the Delaware River Basin Commission caucus, and they say, hey, look, we've got $10 million to spend on the Delaware this year. How should we divvy it up between you and the Delaware River Restoration Program? What do you guys say?
Yeah, I don't think that, but that doesn't seem likely to happen though, right? Because of the diverse funding sources. I mean, that actually could be a risk if DRBC gets moved to Interior, I would say, more so than EPA, right? Because it would be different.
Exactly.
Different. So I think these are all really good questions. I don't think we're going to solve it all today, but I really appreciate the robust discussion and interest. You know, I know that, you know, we have a lot of, it's a complex issue and we have a lot of gray areas to nail down. So I'm not professing to know all the answer or have a crystal ball, but we're really excited to just dive in and tackle this problem.
Can I just add one thing? Just as an idea, one of the things we tried to do, and we didn't have the funding back when I was there, was to do a economic analysis of and how it's not only environmentally effective to have a basin commission, but it's cost effective to have somebody looking at it on a basin scale instead of doing things state by state. And I'm doing some work right now out in the Three Rivers area, the Ohio drainage, and people out there saying, oh, if we only had a DRBC, we only had somebody that would pull us together. So I don't know, and you think of Georgia wasn't able to get the ALF, that Georgia wasn't able to get a basin commission together, and just the legal funds that they've spent on that three state water issue. So I don't know if that's a potential somewhere, but money talks, and if we could show that it really is a environmental benefit and a cost savings, it might win some more people over.
That's great. Thanks for that thought.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say this could all be kumbaya and work out well for everyone. For me, who is working for the coalition to advocate for funding for the Delaware program specifically on the Hill, I just want to express that there are concerns that there are ways that this could actually hamper that effort. There are ways that this could enhance that effort, but I'm concerned about ways that it could hamper it. So that's just why I brought this up.
Just for clarification, Peter, you're saying that the caucus idea could hamper the effort?
Not in and of itself, it's just how, I don't know again, is this a Delaware River Basin Commission caucus, or is this a Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commission caucus? Because there's a difference. Stacey, as you and I talked before, you had said if you did a Mid-Atlantic Basin caucus, they'd probably advocate for a bunch of other things. And then my question is, does that mean that folks in the Delaware are going to be advocating for funding for the Chesapeake Bay program? And are you expecting people in West Virginia to advocate for funding for, because they're in the Potomac Basin, to advocate for funding in the Delaware? Because it's probably not going to happen. Maybe it would, but I think it's unlikely. So anyway, there are a lot of things that may sound possible, but they're unlikely. And again, if Delaware River Basin Commission caucus, you're focusing on one thing, which is getting funding for the commission. If there's a Delaware River Basin caucus, it could be equally trying to get funding for a bunch of different programs in the Delaware, including the Delaware River Basin Commission. But it sounds like you guys are focusing, and I don't blame you, you're focusing on trying to get money for federal money for the commission. That's what you want. And it's less concerned to get funding for others in the Delaware. Of course, we're concerned about that. Did I make my point? I'm not sure.
No, I understand.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna, ask for pencils down for DRBC, but this was a robust discussion that certainly warrants further discussion. And in terms of next steps, as we have about 10 minutes left, taking a step back and, looking at the entire federal policy work plan as a whole, the coalition staff will be sharing a more polished version of this work plan. Kip, you can stop sharing the screen. That way we can see everybody whenever you, thank you. So we'll share the polished versions of the work plans with you all for further edits and feedback, of course. And if you'd like to get more involved in any of the issues that were discussed today, our lead organizations, if you want to put your contact info in the chat, otherwise we'll be sure to send the contact information out after these calls. Everything that was inputted into the chat box will be saved and utilized for the polished version of these work plans, and these really serve as living documents. So we're going to keep, referring to these as we prioritize and refer back to these across along the year. For folks that want to get involved, again, our next federal policy work group call is scheduled for this upcoming Tuesday, January 19th at 9 a.m. If you are interested, feel free to drop me a note in the chat, and I'll be happy to add your email to that listserv. Those federal policy work group calls are every other week on Tuesdays. They're usually very efficient, lasting about 15 minutes to a half hour. So I invite you all to get involved. Actually, we're going to be continuing to talk about DRBC on the next federal policy work group call on Tuesday. So I invite anyone who's interested to get on that so we can collectively create our strategy as the coalition moving forward and leading up to our virtual Hill Week, which is scheduled again from March 8th to March 12th. We'll be trying to meet with every single office throughout the watershed during the week. We're hopefully having Senators Carper and Coons deliver kickoff remarks live, but we're awaiting scheduling and such from them. So stay tuned, and we will be sending out registration links this afternoon for that. So stay tuned on that. So with all of that said, I just want to again open it up to anyone who wants to share or ask any additional questions, clarifications, thoughts, ideas as we move ahead in this process. Additionally, if there's anything any of you are working on that you can use some help from us, feel free to share. So,
yeah, Sandra, this is Jerry. I was wondering when the new Congress comes in, could you send us a list of the senators and the members of Congress that are in the watershed?
Absolutely, Jerry. We have
Yes.
that. I think the map is unchanged from from our 116th Congress, with one exception that we're still waiting on. In York's 22nd district, there is a really interesting, to put it tamely, race between incumbent Anthony Brindisi and his predecessor, Claudia Tenney. They are neck and neck. I think, Peter, last time we spoke, they're 22 votes apart or something. And
I think it was 29, and it's going to court next Monday. I think it's still not resolved.
Yeah, but Jerry, yes, I will absolutely send everyone on these calls.
And the second part of that, when the committees are reformed, could you send us a list of the new ranking members and the new chairs and new ranking members, as well as the committees that have oversight of the programs we just talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely an easy. Yeah.
Technically, we're in the new Congress at noon on January 3rd.
Oh.
The 117th Congress began, but because of the wackiness with the Georgia runoffs, the Senate is not formed. In fact, the two Georgia senators, I don't think, are certified until January 22nd. So they're not going to be sworn in after Biden takes over. So technically, I don't think the Democrats take control of the Senate until that happens.
Yes.
A little after January 20th.
Okay.
So the Senate has not done their committee formations, and the chairs and the rankings are not official yet. House is done. 117th.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. Anyone else? All righty. Well, with that, I'll give you 5 minutes back to your day. So thank you, everyone, for all the time you spent with us today. Really appreciate it. And look out for a follow-up email and talk soon. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.